Hi, I'm Sarah, 30. For years, I've carried a secret that's been a heavy burden, but I'm finally ready to share my story. It's not easy to talk about, but sometimes life throws us curveballs that force us to confront our truths. This isn't just a tale of love or family happiness, as one might expect. Instead, it revolves around sacrifices and hidden emotions that have shaped my life. People often say that love is the sole reason two people marry, but I learned otherwise from the very first time I met my stepfather, Mr. Daniel. There was an unsettling intuition that told me something was amiss. With time, I came to understand that my mother was merely a facade. I was the true reason he married her. My mother, Aisha, owned a quaint fashion boutique. After my father passed away when I was young, she poured her heart into raising me alone, demonstrating resilience and determination along the way. Her efforts not only sustained us, but also transformed the boutique into a cherished establishment in our community. To me, she was a model of strength and independence, and life progressed steadily. She worked tirelessly while I focused on my studies. However, everything changed the moment I stepped into college. It felt as though I had finally broken free from my mother's protective embrace and was stepping into an entirely new world. It was here that I met Mr. Daniel, a captivating philosophy lecturer who was not only my teacher, but also my stepfather. From our first interaction, I was engrossed in his teaching style, which shifted my perspective on life. Our after-class conversations became frequent, revealing a profound influence he had on my thoughts. But amid our growing rapport, I began to notice an unsettling change in his gaze, a look that felt both intimate and invasive. Initially, I dismissed it, thinking it was just my imagination. Yet, as time progressed, the discomfort grew stronger. His gaze, once one of a teacher to a student, began to feel charged with unspoken emotions. It was as if there were hidden meanings in the silence between us, igniting confusion and unease within me. Every time we interacted, Mr. Daniel would gravitate toward me, his proximity increasingly suffocating. He would place a hand on my shoulder, once seemingly innocent, but soon feeling deeply invasive. Our conversations shifted. They no longer revolved purely around academics, but took on an unsettling intimacy. The air thickened with an unnecessary tension that unsettled me. As weeks passed, I found myself retreating further into my shell, inventing excuses to decline offers for after-class discussions. I sat farther away in class, avoided eye contact, and frequently arrived late to evade him entirely. I hoped that by creating distance, I could elude the anxiety that coiled tightly inside me. For a while, keeping my distance seemed to restore a sense of normalcy, yet I knew deep down that the unease I felt would not easily dissipate. Each glance or lingering touch from Mr. Daniel carved deeper into my apprehension, casting a shadow over my college experience that I couldn't ignore. However, I didn't realize that the safety I'd crafted for myself was merely temporary. After a year away at school, I returned home to find my mother transformed. She was more cheerful than usual, her eyes sparkled with a newfound brightness whenever she spoke, and occasionally I caught her laughing to herself, concealing a special happiness. Curiosity stirred within me, but when I asked her about it, she simply said that life was improving. One afternoon, while we sat together in the living room, she suddenly plopped down beside me, her face radiant, her joy uncontainable. She had important news. She had met someone special, someone she wanted me to meet. Watching her enthusiasm, I felt a lightness in my heart. For so many years, my mother had raised me alone, sacrificing her own happiness. It was wonderful to see her finally embrace the joy she deserved. The day of the introduction arrived, and my anticipation built as I helped set the house and carefully prepared the dining table, each detail meticulously attended to. I could see the excitement dancing in my mother's eyes, and I genuinely hoped this man would bring her the comfort and happiness she had long sought. When the doorbell rang, my heart fluttered in rhythm with my mother's quick, eager steps toward the door. I stood in the living room, my mind racing with images of the man who would soon enter our lives. Yet, that excitement turned to a cold shock as the door opened to reveal Mr. Daniel. I froze, disbelief washing over me. All the unease I'd tried to bury surged back, filling me with a whirlwind of conflicting emotions. This was the man my mother adored, the man she introduced with such warmth, yet he was the very person I had been hoping to avoid. Why him? How had they met? What was his true intention? Questions bombarded my thoughts, forcing memories of his unsettling demeanor to flood back. I glanced at my mother, desperate for her to notice the tension brewing in the room, but she remained blissfully unaware, her smile wide as she warmly introduced Daniel. Daniel stepped into our home, exuding a calm friendliness, greeting me with surprise, as if he hadn't expected me to be my mother's daughter. I attempted to match his enthusiasm, but turmoil churned within me. My mother, innocent and oblivious, chatted away. Meanwhile, I was trapped in my own anxious thoughts, grappling with the disconcerting reality that this seemingly happy moment held hidden complexities. Their cheerful banter unveiled a startling connection. He was my teacher. As they discussed this unexpected twist, I felt increasingly insecure, questioning who Mr. Daniel truly was and why he was suddenly playing such a significant role in my mother's life. Was this mere coincidence, or did it conceal something deeper, something I couldn't quite grasp? Life continued as usual after that day. There were no alarming signs from Daniel, no moments that rekindled my worries. My mother and he slipped into an easy companionship, their bond growing with each passing day. She radiated happiness, smiling more often, her spirit glowing brighter than I had seen in years. Before long, my mother decided to remarry, and Daniel officially became my stepfather. Everything unfolded smoothly, and our family life took on a peaceful, stable rhythm, time passing without a hitch. I began to suspect I had let my initial anxieties cloud my judgment. Perhaps my apprehensions stemmed from the stress of adjusting to both my mother's evolving life and my own. Seeing my mother radiate happiness each day gradually eased my doubts and insecurities. Watching her smile brightly alongside Daniel, I realized the most important thing was that she had finally found joy. I accepted their relationship and gave them my blessing, hoping my mother would continue to bask in that happiness. I also learned to embrace Daniel as a part of our family. As time passed, I noticed no unusual signs in Daniel and began to blame myself for overthinking, letting my worries weigh me down. My mother and Daniel's growing happiness brought some relief, and I genuinely wished her well, hoping her life would always be filled with joy. However, doubts crept back in, lingering in the shadows of my mind. At times, I would dismiss those thoughts, convincing myself I was merely being overly sensitive or imagining things. In the months following my college graduation at 22, I took on a job helping my mother at her boutique, spending precious time together. Daniel frequently stopped by the store, assisting with little tasks when he could. Life was steady, and I no longer harbored doubts about him. I truly believed he would be a good husband to my mother and a supportive figure in my life. But the worst day of my life shattered that illusion. I was plagued by a fever that left my body burning and fatigued. While I lay in my room, trying to drift into sleep, I assumed Daniel would take care of me, thinking he had no reason to leave the house. I trusted him. After all those years, it felt safe to do so. My mother urged me to rest at home, so I complied, unaware of the ominous undertones simmering beneath the surface. When Daniel entered my room with a glass of water and a handful of pills, he assured me they were painkillers to help lower my fever. His voice radiated kindness, dispelling any flicker of suspicion. The fever muddled my thoughts, and in my desperation to feel better, I swallowed the pills without hesitation, downing them with the water he offered. At that moment, everything felt normal, and I sensed nothing odd. I lay there, hoping the fever would soon dissipate. But about 20 minutes later, I felt a subtle shift. Daniel returned to my room, this time empty-handed, and I noticed a strange glint in his eyes. When I attempted to sit up, shock washed over me. I couldn't move. A wave of paralysis gripped my body, leaving me helpless as panic surged within me. I lay wide-eyed, fighting against the immobilizing fear that enveloped me. As Daniel drew closer, his demeanor remained calm, but the intensity in his gaze sent chills down my spine. Struggling desperately to regain control, I found that not even a finger would move. The helplessness was terrifying, but that fear deepened exponentially as he leaned in, his face inches from mine, wearing a smile that seemed to promise unimaginable horrors. His smile twisted into something unrecognizable, no longer friendly and gentle, but chilling and predatory. I have waited for this opportunity for a long time. His voice trailed off, but the meaning hung heavy in the air. A wave of terror washed over me, as disbelief churned in my mind. What was happening? All those worries and doubts I had pushed aside surged forward, becoming terrifyingly real. The nightmare I thought existed only in my imagination had materialized before my very eyes. Daniel slid onto the bed next to me, his gaze penetrating and sinister, the smile on his lips uncomfortably wide. I lay paralyzed, overwhelmed by an instinctive dread that left me mute, forced to absorb his every word. Each sentence unfolded like a dark revelation, exposing a chilling truth I had never dared to confront. He spoke of feelings that began when I entered college, how he had longed to draw closer to me, but had faced rejection at every turn. He detailed the lengths he went to bridge the distance I maintained, tricks, manipulation, and ultimately, an intrusion into my personal life. Daniel had unearthed details buried deep in my past, and when he found gold, it led him to my mother. His plan was meticulous, ingratiate himself into her life and win her trust. It all unfolded so seamlessly, and before I knew it, he had become my mother's husband, entwined in the fabric of my family. This revelation plunged me into despair as I grappled with the complexity of betrayal. What seemed like my mother's joy was nothing more than a carefully crafted ruse to draw closer to me. An unbearable wave of pain and nausea washed over me as the horrifying truth settled in. I felt hopeless, realizing my life had been the architect of his sinister design. When Daniel leaned closer, satisfaction radiated from him, an unsettling glow in his eyes that made my skin crawl. His gaze lacked the warmth I had always associated with my mother. It was cold and avaricious. I tried to retreat, but moved only into my own paralysis. My heart raced rapidly while my body felt alien, unresponsive to my desperate pleas for movement. As he bent down, his hands brushed over me, sending a wave of revulsion coursing through my veins. He exerted control over my body, and I lay there, a spectator in my own life, each passing second stretching into an eternity. I craved for it to end, but he persisted, every touch orchestrating my silent agony. The world around me crumbled, and all the connections I had once cherished disintegrated at his whim, each cry for help swallowed by the suffocating silence. Every second felt relentless. Trapped in this torment, I wanted to fight back, but the weight of despair crushed my resolve. My body had become his playground, while time dragged on grotesquely, stretching the nightmare into infinity. I stared at the ceiling, seeking escape in the cold, featureless expanse above me. But every painful moment grounded me further in my reality. A sense of paralysis enveloped me. With each taunting caress, dread consumed my very essence. My self-worth shattered, my dignity stripped away. I became a mere shell of the person I once was. Finally, it was over. I lay there, emptiness gnawing at my insides, the room a stifling prison of cold detachment. Daniel stood, casually straightening his clothes as if nothing had transpired. I was frozen in place, my reality collapsing around me. Everything I once held sacred felt like dust in the wind. Why had this happened? How could the man my mother adored, the one I had welcomed into my life, turn out to be a source of such horror? My heart ached with confusion and betrayal, the questions echoing in the silence left behind. Pain twisted through my chest like a vice, each heartbeat reminding me of the betrayal coursing through my veins. I couldn't breathe, the air thick and suffocating, as helplessness bore down on me. Daniel shot me one last look, his eyes devoid of warmth, and then he was gone, leaving the silence of the room to amplify my anguish. An overwhelming tide of hurt and anger surged within me, threatening to drown me in despair. How could I keep going when everything felt irrevocably shattered? As the drug's effects began to fade, clarity returned slowly, but my body remained weak and unsteady. Every attempt to rise sent sharp pain shooting through me. Gritting my teeth, I forced myself to straighten my clothes, attempting to wipe away the evidence of the horror I had just endured. My gaze drifted around the room, landing finally on the phone perched on the table. It was my lifeline, my way to escape this nightmare. With trembling hands, I approached it, each step a monumental effort. I picked up the phone, my hands shaking violently as I dialed. Each number felt like a weight, anchoring me deeper into panic, yet I took a deep breath, focusing on keeping my voice steady. My heart raced while the operator's voice crackled through, calm yet distant. It felt like an eternity before the police burst into the house, their presence both a comfort and a reminder of the chaos that had unfolded. The tranquil silence shattered as voices and footsteps filled the air. Daniel, crushed by the gravity of his actions, offered no resistance as the officers handcuffed him, bowing his head as if he accepted his fate. Moments later, my mother returned, her face a portrait of confusion, especially when she saw me, trembling and weak, standing among the police. At first, she was bewildered, her mind struggling to piece together the unfolding drama. I looked into her eyes and felt my strength dissipate, the weight of the truth crashing down upon me. I could no longer hold back. Tears streamed down my cheeks as I laid bare everything Daniel had done, my voice breaking as I recounted the harrowing ordeal. She remained silent, her expression a blend of shock and despair, as if the very foundation of her reality had crumbled beneath her. When I finished, she collapsed into a heap, sobs racking her body. Her overwhelming guilt for not recognizing the danger Daniel posed washed over her in waves. "I'm sorry, I'm so sorry," she repeated. But I knew no amount of remorse could alter the pain we felt that day. Everything had irrevocably changed. My mother was consumed by self-blame, and I knew I could never return to the innocence of our past life. In the aftermath, a fragile sense of relief settled within me. I had confronted the truth and seen justice served, yet the lingering wounds felt insurmountable. I learned that silence only deepened the scars. Facing the truth, no matter how painful, was the only pathway to healing. I also recognized my mother's misplaced trust, both in Daniel and in the facade of normalcy we had crafted. It became clear that communication was vital. If I had found the courage to voice my concerns about Daniel earlier, perhaps the outcome would have been different. Though Daniel faced his consequences, the repercussions of his actions would haunt us forever, leaving remnants of a pain that no amount of time could erase. Our lives would never return to the way they were, but we had to move forward, each step a testament to our resilience. I had to learn to live with the pain and the haunting memories of my past, seeking moments of peace amid wounds that seemed impossible to heal. My mother must also navigate the path of self-forgiveness, burdened by her own struggles. Although our lives remain a tumultuous journey, one truth stands resolute. I will not retreat into silence any longer. Progress is my choice, regardless of the obstacles ahead. Regret and pain will always linger, but I have embarked on a transformative journey of healing. No longer will I be a prisoner of my past. I will reclaim the strength that slipped away in that nightmare, unearthing my true self with every step forward.